one's saying don't play football. No one, not one person in any of my stories, and never have I ever suggested that football should not be played. The question is what are the rules that should govern what you're allowed to do on a football field?
This is a discussion that's coming to the forefront, and I don't think it's a dialogue that went on 5 years ago and certainly didn't go on 10 years ago.
Technology caught up with football, and now we know the game comes with consequences.
He's gallant, he's heroic, he's gutsy. I want my kid to be like that. You might want your kid to be like that, but you probably don't want him to be dead.
Snap after snap and hit after hit, millions of players put themselves at risk for a degenerative brain disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Even worse, CTE is not isolated only to football. It affects all athletes that play a contact sport. The entire world faces one of the biggest questions in the history of sport. Is it worth it?
And these guys have been on a pedestal, most of them, since they were in high school or younger. They've been thought of as larger than life. They don't have the same problems you and I have, and they have a very hard time admitting they have a problem and seeking help when they do.
The problem Dr. Robert Cantu is talking about is the degenerative brain disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
It's a disease that occurs with repetitive concussive and subconcussive hits to the head. And what we're trying to understand is how this neurodegenerative disease progresses and how it presents when people are alive.
Dan Danshavar is one of the graduate researchers at the Boston University CTE Center. Recently, the center has released a study about the cause and effects of the disease.
The reason why we're interested in this is that right now we don't understand how CTE looks when someone's alive. We have an idea, but the diagnosis has to be made post-mortem. And the unfortunate part about that is if you can't diagnose the disease when someone's alive, you won't be able to get a group together to see if certain treatments work and then eventually find a cure for the disease.
Everyone is susceptible to the disease, but the sports that have the highest risk are football and hockey. These two sports will always have contact, but BU researcher Christine Baugh says there are ways to decrease the risk for CTE.
So thinking about ways you could reduce the overall amount of brain trauma and thereby reduce the risk for CTE in a way that doesn't change the game. So limiting contact practices, changing some of those, in my opinion, archaic drills that aren't really necessary for learning how to tackle, those kinds of things that won't change the nature of the game, but will make the game safer. High school kids take between 1,000 and 1,500 hits per season. Hits at the force that's equivalent to a car running into a brick wall at 35 miles an hour, which is a big hit. And that's 1,000 to 1,500 of those per season. So if we can do what we can to eliminate some of those, more than half of them come from practice. If we can eliminate some of those that aren't necessary, we're reducing the incidence, hopefully, of CTE down the line.
Just recently, all 50 states have passed concussion legislation. This legislation requires the athlete to pass cognitive tests in order to play, and it also limits contact practices. Dwayne Sigsbury is the athletic director at Cathedral High School in Boston, and he says he likes the new legislation.
We do have a process that we follow, and all of our athletes are impact tested in the beginning of the season, and if they do get a concussion, we have a baseline of where they're at as far as before they were concussed, and if they have a concussion, they need to follow the steps in order to get back to the playing fields.
There's one thing that's for certain. It's the contact that will be getting out of the sport.